I'm Ben Smith.
I'm Max Tawney.
And this is Mixed Signals from
Actually, wait,
Media.
I'm so sorry.
Did you get your own name wrong?
No, I didn't. I just was like, I'm sorry. I felt so tempted. I still hear Nayeema in the thing. I'm like tempted to say Naeema's name. Anyway, let's just do it again.
I'm Ben Smith.
I'm Max Tawney.
You sure?
Yes, I am sure. That's me. I'm not Nayeema.
Okay. This is Mixed Signals from Semaphore Media.
This week, ahead of the presidential inauguration and the World Economic Forum in Davos, we wanted to talk about the role of the media in an increasingly unpredictable global political landscape. So to do that, we're sitting down with Ian Bremmer. Ian is the president of the Eurasia Group, a political risk consultancy business, and he is a ubiquitous figure both in the political and financial media and in the contact lists of many major world leaders.
Yeah, I've known Ian a long time, and he's a kind of amazing self-made figure who in some sense has become, the Secretary of State for corporate America.
Well, we'll kind of ask him how he got there, what world leaders are feeling about what's going on right now, and media's role in either creating order or disorder right after the break. Ben, how are you? You're sitting across the office from me in a different room, but how's everything going over there?
It's good. I'm actually kind of jealous of you because I am preparing to go to Davos, which is always interesting, but it sure feels like Washington is going to be more interesting next week.
See, that's really bizarre because usually it's the other way around. Usually it's that people in my position are like, I want to go to Davos. That's, I get to go skiing or whatever. I remember when I was a staffer at Business Insider.
Reporting. I think the word is reporting.
I know what goes on there. When I was a staffer at Business Insider, I remember our editor-in-chief at the time slideshow about skiing at Davos with one of our other top editors, and I was skeptical of how much work was actually being done.
Yeah, it's a hazard there because you wind up on the slopes either with somebody who's way better than you or worryingly worse than you. Something I've done with respectively two of our colleagues who will remain unnamed, but barely avoiding injury in both cases.
Well, we'll talk off the show about whether or not you're a good skier, because I am curious about that. But this is a media show, not a skiing show, so we should get into it. We've got a big calendar, very busy calendar of major media events over the next few days, which we've kind of talked about. We've got the second inauguration of Donald Trump, which I will be at, so please give me tips, scoops, anything related to the inauguration. Say hello. I'll be covering the media circus. You're headed to Davos, obviously, to do some skiing and a lot of schmoozing with the financial and political elite. But presumably between the parties and the networking, there's actually some real news happening at these events, right?
Yeah, Davos is this incredibly target-rich reporting environment, just huge gathering of CEOs, presidents, prime ministers, foreign ministers, finance ministers, who are stuck in this tiny little town with you. And there was this last time I was there, the PR guy Richard Edelman was sort of trying to avoid my calls on a story that I was writing about him. And twice in a row, he just, as he's trying to avoid my calls, just runs into me, which is like a great small town reporting experience. But more broadly, it's a place that kind of where people are trying to figure out what will be the elite consensus of the next year. Famously often totally wrong. But it's a place in some sense where kind of consensus gets made and decisions get made in that context. And right now they will of course all just be watching you in Washington trying to figure out what the hell's going on there.
Sure, absolutely. Well, we know a few people who won't be at Davos, or they'll be there a little bit later, like Mark Zuckerberg and Jeff Bezos, who are going to be at the inauguration. It's funny that you mentioned that's where consensus is made because, of course, generally, one of the rules or jokes that we have is that anytime that consensus is made at Davos, generally the opposite thing happens. Though, of course, last year, the Davos consensus was that Trump was going to win and it was headed in this direction, and things ended up, while it wasn't a predictable 2024, we ended up in the same place that many of the elites thought we would. So should we be listening to elites more?
The elites are back, I guess. Is that what's going on? I don't know.
Who knows? Well, a person who knows a little bit more than us about whether elites are back is Ian Bremmer, who is our guest on the show today. So, Ben, can you tell us a little bit about Ian and his background?
Yeah, Ian, who people will have seen on podcasts. He hosts a television show, has his own podcast, sends out a bunch of newsletters, founded a group called Eurasia Group in 1998 that's become a really important advisory firm consultancy to big, particularly to American companies. And his sort of core philosophy, which I think is sort of bearing out, is that we're headed into this G0 world, which he describes as a global power vacuum in which no country is willing and able to set the international agenda.
Well, let's give Ian a call and talk about all that.
Hello, Ian, and thank you for joining us.
Hey guys, good to be with you.
So I guess I want to just begin by kind of talking about your own role. This is a media show, and when I think about kind of your role as somebody who's both kind of thinks a lot about strategy, talks to everybody, gives behind the scenes advice, that people like in the tradition you come out of, in some ways, were often very, very behind the scenes figures. I mean, Henry Kissinger was, maybe he would write something in foreign affairs once in a while in his later years, but you are all over the media. You're producing newsletters and puppet shows and a television show, and which is also a podcast, writing this weekly email that lots of people read. And I'm curious how you think about that. And kind of in this media age, it feels like you've made a decision that like part of the kind of role you have has to be very, very public, very in the media, almost running a media business.
I guess I would say it's not that I made a decision, it's that I never changed my decision as I became better known, had more influence, had more resources, built a staff, built a company. I'm a political scientist, I'm an analyst. I've never been in a government. I've never had a policy role, with the exception of advisory and formal stuff. And my view has always been the reason I didn't want to be in government is because I didn't want to have to somehow coat what I was saying publicly. I wanted to be able to say what I believed. And I think there's value to have people say what they believe, especially people that are informed. To say what they believe, people that actually have experience and expertise and network in an area. So when I'm giving a speech that is going to be projected to 1 million people, or in the case of my TED Talk, 12 million people, I can be as honest as I would be sitting in a private room with a head of state or with you. And I think that that's off the record. And I think that that's incredibly important because it allows me to be sane and feel like I still, that I have some sort of impact.
So, Ian, you've talked a lot about G0, which is this idea that, the major Cold War powers, principally the United States, have receded over the last decade or so, and that the power and leadership vacuum that's now in its place is this concept called kind of G0. We're really interested in the kind of media repercussions of that. So as you look at the situation currently around the globe, I'm very curious, do you think that the media is responsible for more order or more disorder? What's the media's role inside the new order?
So it's a very interesting question, and I love the space that you guys operate in, but I need to take a step back for 1 second because it'll inform my answer. Which is the way that I defined G0 when I first coined the term, I think 12 years ago, maybe 13, was not that the United States was receding. It was rather that the Americans were increasingly renouncing the order that the Americans had created. Because if we look at where we are today, and I mean, the G0 is here today, right? It's been coming for a while, but it's here now. It's not that the United States is suddenly much less powerful than it was 5 years ago. In fact, the opposite in many ways is true, right? America actually relationally has much more power than its allies did 5 years ago. When I think about America, it's the consolidation of governance in the U.S. under Trump is much stronger than in allies, and America's adversaries are on their asses right now too. I mean, Iran's lost their empire, the axis of resistance fell apart. Russia's in deep structural decline. China's in the worst economic conditions since the 90s, maybe the 70s, while the U.S. is actually coming back from the pandemic in the best position of any advanced industrial democracy. So the reason I'm saying all of that, aside from the fact just I want everyone listening to this to understand what the G0 is.
If you, by the way, if you were listening on like 2x, you better go back and slow that down, because I feel like you were on 2x there, yeah, and that was pretty good.
Well, because I was being political science wonky, and I know that's not the thing you guys want to talk about. So now when I slow it down to normal speed, the reason I wanted to make sure we got that right is because you asked me what role I think media is having. And it's not that the role of U.S.-owned media types has receded. Elon has not receded. My God, not at all. But what the United States reflects and is exporting is not rule of law. It's not multilateralism and alignment with the same values and standards of our allies. No, it's the promotion of the alternatives for Deutschland in Germany and the destruction of the EU. It's the demand that the royalty in the UK steps in and forces the British Prime Minister to stand down. It is the law of the jungle where the Americans get to make demands by dint of being more powerful. And that's a very, very unusual place for American media to be. It is not aligned with the historical U.S. worldview.
And do you think that the heads of state, foreign ministers, some of whom we'll see in Davos next week, do you feel like they're figuring out this media environment, or are they totally lost in it? Do you have a sense? Do you have sort of examples of who you see has really figured it out, who hasn't?
Well, it depends on which media environment, right? So, I think that you have people that are aspirants to various components of MAGA, like in particular the Argentine president Milei, who is not just a compelling figure for headlines, but has also had a really successful first year. So he has a good story to tell too, and he's very, very good at social media. He really figured it out. Former President Yoon in South Korea is really, really bad at media, right? He has not. So if you wanted to do a spectrum of where leaders fall, let's bracket the spectrum with Milei and let's say Bukele from El Salvador and Modi from India on one side. And let's put Yoon on the other. And then you've got people in between. And the Europeans are largely on the uncomfortable side because they have a very different, first of all, many of them have different rules about free speech. They're deeply uncomfortable about, sort of this algorithmic promotion of anything, including disinformation and people that aren't real. And they see it as a threat to their democracy, which I am, frankly, somewhat empathetic to.
I mean, do you think, though, that contemporary politicians have to essentially be influencers at some level, have that level of comfort, on the vertical screen? Are there other paths to power? Is that now really the path to power?
I don't think it's the only path to power. I wouldn't say that. I mean, for example, you look at Germany, and Friedrich Merz is likely to become the next chancellor, which is, the most powerful position in an individual country in Europe. It's the biggest economy, matters a lot in the EU. And I would say he's not particularly savvy as a media figure at all. Now, Germany is maybe one electoral cycle behind other European countries in terms of populism and anti-establishment sentiment. And Germany is it's a coalition multi-party system. So after the elections, you're actually cobbling together a government, which is very different than kind of like this winner-take-all system. So some of it depends on that. I would argue that in Japan, the third largest economy in the world, the LDP, more or less, it's not a single-party democracy, but it's close. And the LDP basically decides, among the various factions inside the LDP, the Liberal Democratic Party, who's going to win. And sometimes they're quite charismatic, like Shinzo Abe was, and like Koizumi Younger Junichiro is. and sometimes they're not, like the present prime minister. And that's okay.
So uncharismatic people can still dream of backroom deals to power.
Well, I mean, look,
basically.
you're asking me from the perspective of the American political landscape, which is in the extreme in terms of just how much being a media figure has mattered. It's a 2-year, multi-billion-dollar farce of an election, right? It's not the way one should
Steve
hold an
Bannon
election.
has said that he feels like Trump's real genius was that Trump was the first to realize that all politics is media. Which I always thought was sort of interesting, which it feels true in this environment right now.
It's a very U.S. perspective. Yeah, I mean, Dan Bannon's a very U.S. guy. He hasn't been as successful when he's tried to export that.
Yeah.
Is there any correlation though between like the health and I kind of put that in quotes of these of some of the countries that you mentioned, and whether or not the system of selecting their rulers can be swayed by kind of importance on vertical video? Like, would you say that is Japan, or is a country like Japan in a better place? Do they have healthier elections because voters can't be kind of persuaded by, like being good at vertical video or interviews or things like that? I'm curious.
I think we have an independent variable question here, which is what's causing what? I mean, is it that the American political system is unhealthy and therefore it makes vertical media more important? Or is it algorithms actually have played more of a role and that has in turn made the American political system more unhealthy? I think that the latter might well be true. There's certainly an interrelationship between them. There's also a big difference between an unhealthy system politically that happens to be very healthy in lots of other ways. The U.S. system, is obviously performing incredibly well in lots of ways that don't have to do with civic infrastructure and institutions. So that's probably an unsatisfying answer.
Slightly switching gears, though, I want to ask a little bit about the media consumption by the big players themselves. And it's interesting you bring up South Korea. We had a story recently on Semaphore about how the South Korean president's claims of a rigged election and left-wing collusion with North Korea kind of really mirrored those made by popular South Korean YouTubers who are increasingly popular there. Are there specific changes that you've seen in how world leaders themselves consume media?
Yeah, I mean, are they themselves getting pilled by watching YouTube in some sense? I think that was the implication of that Korea story.
Yeah, I agree that that was the implication of that story. And I think that the South Korean president is unusual because he doesn't actually, he's an outsider, he's a bit of an outcast, he's not very socially or interpersonally engaging, he's not a retail politician. You may know this story, Ben and Max, that when he ran, the reason he won in part is because he created an AI version of Yoon. Did you know that?
No. I did not know that. No.
No, he did, and it was more attractive. It was more charismatic. It gave more engaging answers, and the voters liked it. So he's unusual. And he's like a little bit more like DeSantis, right? I think so. Most of the world leaders that I engage with on a regular basis, I would say, are people that actually have very little time for real-time red pilling or blue pilling media consumption. There's no way the Japanese leaders that I know have time for that. There's no way the European leaders I know have time for that. The Canadian leaders I know have time. And I'm talking about across the political spectrum. They just don't.
They're just not at home watching YouTube in bed.
They just don't. They are such hard jobs. Almost all of their time is filled. They have briefs, confidential briefs that are difficult and challenging they have to read. They have to maintain an enormous number of facts in their system. I mean, they might watch a half an hour TV. They might engage a little bit, in social media in their off time, but generally speaking, I would say they're like CEOs that we know that don't even have email, right?
Yeah. All right. Well, we're going to take a quick break, and we'll be back in a second. This week on our branded segment from Think with Google, I spoke with Google's VP of Marketing, Josh Spanier, about what he's calling AI's shift from hype to how. The AI story is moving so fast, new tools, new projects. Anything new you're excited by?
I'm so excited. I'm really, really excited about how we have firmly moved from the AI hype era into the AI how era. We're actually building things with AI across our industry, across Google, that is enabling incredible impact. Something that I really, really enjoyed recently was my Spotify Wrapped end-of-year analysis. So Spotify, in partnership with Google, used a Google tool called Notebook LM to create a podcast which read to me a 5 to 6 minute podcast of my listening habits, what songs I'd most been into over the year. My whole family got their version of their Notebook LM Spotify Wrapped podcast, and we listened to all of them. It was just a really fun, magical moment enabled by AI.
I feel like I have to ask you what was in your Wrapped list now. I'm thinking a lot of like 90s Britpop.
There was some 90s Britpop, but I'm honestly more into sort of house and dance music. I'm kind of rave generation, so, that sort of stuff. From a business perspective, just inside Google Marketing, we've been experimenting using AI to really help us speed up our understanding of audiences. So we're sitting on hundreds and hundreds of pages of documents, on focus group videos, on other inputs around Gen Z or millennials. And what we can do is take all that content and create an AI persona, a proxy for one of the audiences we care about. And these proxies we can speak to. You literally can start the AI persona and chat with them about a campaign we're doing. Because Gemini, Google's large language model, is multimodal, we can upload an ad we've made, have the AI persona watch the ad, and then tell us whether they think this ad is actually compelling for that audience persona, for that profile.
Does it give good notes?
It's actually giving us remarkably good notes. Now, it's not the perfect answer, and you still have to do fundamental research, but it's actually allowing us to go, oh, this is a good creative direction or a not so good creative direction, and actually helping us speed up some of the decisions we're making about the territories to explore for our creative.
And where can marketers go to get better at using these tools?
You can head on over to thinkwithgoogle.com to learn a lot more about these tools and others to help you up your AI game.
Thanks, Josh.
Thanks, Ben.
You had a run-in with Elon Musk, who we were talking about back in 2022. You wrote that he told you he'd spoken to Putin recently about the war in Ukraine. He then volubly denied it. And I'm curious kind of what you made of the episode, what you made of his denial.
I guess I was a little surprised that he publicly said what he said, though, I mean, more recent reporting in the Wall Street Journal and elsewhere, and, they've done their own they've done their own investigations. I haven't spoken to any of them about it. Actually confirmed pretty much everything in my piece. So,
yeah, what did you make of that experience, I guess? I mean, he is, as we've said, the most important media figure in the world. And
he wasn't then. He was just,
yeah, he is now.
Really important. He is now. Look, I mean, I would rather him not have been personally upset with me. I don't like being the story, right? So that wasn't pleasant. But I didn't write any differently about that as I would have with anything else that I cover. Whatever. I think that if you just keep your head down and do honest work and also admit when you're wrong, like sometimes I'll make a bad call. We talked about Milei beforehand. I thought that Milei was not going to succeed. And he's had, as I said at the beginning of our call, he's had a fantastic year. And I proactively came out and said, you know what? I thought he was going to screw up. He's actually done a fantastic job. Let me explain why I thought what I did and how I got it wrong. He was so impressed with that. He reached out, wanted to do an interview, and we ended up doing a 45-minute interview. I think the only other American media establishment he had worked with, if you can call it that, was Tucker Carlson before me. And I'd like to argue that mine was a little more fact-based.
Just to go back really quickly to get a sense of how information is flowing these days, what is that? Does he WhatsApp you? Do you get a written letter from the presidential spokesman's office? Like, how does that kind of stuff travel?
He reposted something that I put out or something someone put out with my video explaining how I got Milei wrong. And then one of his advisors said, he would love to be on the show. And so it was like he saw it. That was something he consumed. And remember, I'm like, I think he's actually very, very good personally in an unusual way at new media and promoted it. There you go.
So it's really interesting. You obviously it's your job to have relationships with figures in the government and leadership in a lot of different countries. I don't know how you kind of continue to maintain these relationships. I have a hard time maintaining 50 as a reporter, and I think I'm doing okay for myself. But, you also talk to a lot of business leaders, including the leaders of some of the biggest tech and media players, some of whom are Eurasia Group clients. You guys just released your annual risk report, and I want to kind of ask specifically about that. What are some of the risks to those of us in our audience, people who are listening in media, technology, and marketing? What are some of the global risks that apply to us specifically? Let's keep it at that.
To you.
Let's make it about us. Make
us
it about
and
us.
our audience. Yep.
The podcast community and our listeners.
Obviously, when you see the way that Mark Zuckerberg has just done a 180 on what used to be moderation and is now censorship, and his head of public policy and his board member and many other things, right? That's a risk. What is the risk? The risk is that you now have in the President of the United States someone who is actively seeking to unwind the old American order, which, I've never seen a leading country do before, and instead insert a unilateralism that is based on doing deals bilaterally, hub and spoke, with him and his administration and his closest advisors, which, obviously first and foremost appears to be Elon. And so, if you're Mark, you are, and by the way, Mark did, I thought, a pretty good job of navigating behind the scenes the first Trump administration with, very strong relations with the president, with Jared, with others. He was respected in the inner circle last time around. So it's not like he was always a Dem and couldn't figure this out. So you would expect he'd be someone who would figure out how to navigate this early on, but still nowhere near as dramatic a change as what we're seeing now. And if he's doing that, well, how are others going to respond to that? What is Bezos going to do to respond to that, right? Is that going to mean more censorship inside the Washington Post? Is that going to mean a clearing of house politically?
You don't think it's sort of paranoid or cynical to imagine that big American corporate media figures are going to shift the direction of coverage, take it easier on Trump because they're afraid of him?
I think that there is a much bigger concern about Trump on this front than there was in his first term, than there was with Biden, than there was with Bush, than there was with Obama. And I think there are a few reasons for that. One is because Trump is very interested in the media as a foil and as an enemy. He refers to them as the enemy of the people. Number two is because Elon is his guy, gave him $250 million, and Elon wants to destroy establishment media. Number three depends on the confirmation of Kash Patel to a degree. But you have Trump this time around, who had a number of efforts against him that he believes were serious and politicized. And now, by the way, some of his greatest enemies are Republicans that served in his first administration. And he's learned that lesson, and he's not going to point to anyone like that this time around. But some of them are people that he believes, used their access, whether it's part of the so-called deep state in the bureaucracy, or whether it's political leaders, or whether it's media leaders that were attached to them. He considers them enemies. And the possibility that those people will be investigated is not zero. And absolutely, you would rather be in a position to proactively address that than to find out late that you didn't take out any insurance. So I think a lot of people are going to change their behavior on the basis of that.
So maybe setting aside Elon and Trump, as we wrap this up, I'm very curious because you have a much broader vantage point than some of us in the U.S. media. Who do you think are kind of the most powerful media figures and institutions in the world? And let's leave aside Trump and Elon. They're their own things, and we would naturally probably drift that way if we didn't leave them off the list. Is it YouTube? Is it Chinese state media? Who or what institution is it, do you think?
I'd go with, I'd go with TikTok, number one, and we'll see who owns it. So, I have no confidence at all that it's going to be Elon. Let's watch that play out. It's going to be YouTube, it's going to be Facebook, and then it's going to be the next gen AI players in very short order. And let's face it, a lot of stuff is happening in group chat that isn't happening in social media right now. And so in that regard, it's becoming more diffuse and fragmented. And then over time, in short order, it's going to be driven on interactions with your personal AI. And I don't think that's 10 years away. I think that's like 2 or 3 years away. And then it will be the companies that own that AI, that collect that data, that algorithmically nudge you to behave in certain ways, to consume certain things, which is a radically different perspective on the media than what we have right now.
Have you noticed over the last week that, I don't know if you saw the story, but that RedNote, that Chinese app, is the #1 downloaded app in the US App Store? It just sort of created these funny interactions between Chinese users, American users. There's this whole TikTok trend of Chinese users saying, I'm your personal spy, saying farewell to you. Well, it's a funny, it's it's a moment I would not have predicted.
Americans like raising the Uyghurs in Tiananmen, getting like very solid pushback that's informed by Chinese with radically different worldviews. It's very interesting.
What do you make of that moment, this moment, which obviously isn't going to last?
It's not going to last. That's the problem. I don't make anything of it because it's a random blip. What we need are Americans and Chinese engaging in things that show their collective humanity. Look, when my first trip outside the United States was to the former Soviet Union back in 1986, and I was 16 years old, and I met kids that were young komsomolцы. They were communists, and they were pioneers, and they all knew their ideology just as Americans recite the Pledge of Allegiance. But you peel back one layer, and these kids are the same kids as we are. They got the same interests, they got the same types of friends, same type of interactions, same type of insecurities, same types of hopes and aspirations. They wanted to all know about sharper image because I brought a catalog with me, and I showed them some of the things that we had. I remember there was a cordless phone that was it had a flotation device, and it was waterproof, so you could use it in your swimming pool. And there were like 3 different levels of technology that like blew their frickin' minds. Like, what do you mean a swimming pool? You mean like you'd use it in the gymnasium? No, your personal swimming pool, that middle class Americans have. I can't believe that. Like, what do you mean like it doesn't have a cord? No, the phone doesn't have a cord. You can use it. You can walk around. That's crazy. So we had fun with that. But the reality was, like, that was the biggest difference between us, is because like I knew what sharper image was even as a kid in the projects, and they had no idea. But as kids we're the same. And like, it's great if we can have like a Nigerian and a South Korean playing Fortnite on Twitch. That's really cool. What we don't have, right, increasingly, are people connecting around the world with these common interests, particularly the West and China. And that's in my view, that's a deeply dehumanizing trend. That's a horrible thing.
It is true that pre-internet Sharper Image was one of the coolest places in the world that you could go as a kid, and maybe even not as a kid.
Right? To the mall, to whatever it was.
I also remember it vividly. Would read or watch a doc on Sharper Image.
What was the coolest thing you remember? Coolest product you remember from Sharper Image?
I want to say like a foot massager of some sort. I don't know why that's what comes to mind, but that is my association.
The other thing I loved was the lamp you could touch, and it would actually go get brighter and then shut off. All you had to do was touch it.
Amazing.
It's crazy.
So last question for you, Ian, which is, every year you put together a big list of risks. It gets a lot of media coverage. We've talked about it already. As you were putting it together for this year, did you notice any bright spots? They're not going on the risk report, obviously, but do you see any bright spots in terms of global trends?
You may have not gotten to the end of the report, but we have red herrings at the end of the report that are always things that people think are risky that actually aren't. So like we wrote that, Trump fails. A lot of people think Trump is going to fail. A lot of Democrats hope Trump is going to fail. We don't. We actually think, given his power position, a lot of things he wants to do, he will be able to do. So, he'll have a better shot of addressing illegal immigration than any president for a generation. That's a big deal, right? So, now some things will be constructive, some destructive, but the president's not going to fail in his first year. I think that's important. But the most positive stuff is not what's in the report, because the most positive trends globally are not geopolitical trends, because we're in a geopolitical bus cycle, right? So, of course, that part's going to be negative. But we're in a technology boom cycle. And, even more than a boom cycle. I mean, it's you can't even call it a cycle because we've never had the kind of new technological innovation at scale, at speed that we have right now. I mean, we're going to change everything. I mean, so much so that I am less worried about climate because I think that we either completely solve a lot of these problems or we blow ourselves up, but that comes faster than the dystopian stuff that could come from a 2.8 degree centigrade increase with the ice caps melting and all of the rest. So, I mean, really, the extraordinary time that we are going through with the impact of tech, yes, on media, but more importantly on society, more importance on the world around us. I mean, that is, we don't have 50 years for that. We've got 10 or 20. We're all going to live through and experience that. That's pretty extraordinary. It's a little scary, but it's pretty extraordinary.
Yeah, it's a wild time.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for joining us, Ian.
This is a lot of fun. Thanks, man.
Thank you so much, Ian. What did you think about his diagnosis of media in terms of bringing disorder or order to kind of the new G0 world?
And I think the thing he said at the end is really just the truest thing of all. Just that really the underlying thing here is we're just living amid this unbelievably sweeping technological change, and media is a feature of that. And what Elon Musk is doing and the rise of social media and AI kind of confused social media is all a feature of that. And these world leaders and governments are struggling so much to navigate it. And I do think that is sort of the big story of this moment, this kind of amazing surge of technology, including the stuff we're using right now, that combined with just an absolute lack of faith in government. I don't know, did that leave you feeling better or worse about the state of the world?
I don't really know. I mean, I was interested in the question that he couldn't answer as well, which is, are the places that are not dominated by this style of media, we're talking about maybe Japan principally, are those places better off? He couldn't really say, because better off, of course, is subjective, which he kind of emphasized repeatedly. And I'm interested in that. I'm interested to compare the systems, the places where old media still seems to have some sort of sway, or elections and leadership isn't determined by whether or not you're compelling on YouTube. Are those places better than that are they healthier than our system economically, politically, in terms of civic life, in terms of whether people like each other? I don't know. It's interesting. It remains unanswered.
Yeah, I did find it kind of reassuring that he thinks that public life will continue to be sort of dominated by people who are basically out in the world getting information from advisors, from human beings, rather than this what sounds like extremely strange case of this introverted South Korean president who's blackpilling himself on YouTube and sending his avatar out to talk to people, because that is a really dystopian vision of leadership.
It is true, but at the same time, I mean, I do think that, and maybe we're part of the problem here, the media narrative of the last, since Trump won, has been all of that stuff is irrelevant and you've got to pay attention, or it's less relevant than it's ever been and you've got to pay attention to what's going over here. This is where the people are in this other kind of space. And clearly that's something that certain places are taking to heart. I mean, Meta literally took that to heart by making Joe Rogan the focal point of its media strategy. So I don't know, while everybody may be reading the same FT articles and Wall Street Journal articles and watching CNBC and Bloomberg and whatever their partners are overseas, I don't know. I mean, it is clear that the world is changing and these leaders are paying attention to whatever
I don't
new
mind
media landscape we have.
I think it's great if they're going on 3-hour podcasts. I think it's the notion that they would
when
be
they're listening
3-hour podcasts or listening to them that stresses
What about
me out
this?
a little
What
bit.
about this show? Where do we?
I think this
that?
is so dense on accurate and actionable information for leaders that they should obviously listen to this one.
It's the exception that proves the rule, and it's shorter. It's not 3 hours. It's not 3 hours. Well, that's going to be it for us this week. Ben, enjoy Davos. I'll have an interesting time at the inauguration. And on a more somber note, we do want to say, I know that we have a lot of people who listen to this show who are based in the Los Angeles area, and obviously, we're thinking about everybody this week who's been impacted by the fires. Southern California is my home. It's where my family's based, and so and has been there, our entire lives. And so, of course, we're thinking of all of you and hoping everybody is staying safe and and hoping for the most minimal impact to our listeners and those of us who we love. So we just wanted to say something because obviously,
Amen.
Yeah, it's very, very difficult. Anyway, thanks as always for listening to Mixed Signals from Semaphore Media. Our show is produced by Sheena Ozaki with special thanks to Max Toomey, Britta Galanis, Chad Lewis, Rachel Oppenheim, Anna Pizzino, Garrett Wiley, and Jules Zern. Our engineer is Rick Kwan, and our theme music, of course, is by Billy Libby. Our public editor is the AI version of Max, who is more likable and people find to be more interesting and appealing, and to maybe support for public office, or at least to listen to the show. Maybe we'll try that out for an episode. Have AI version of me.
Please no. But if you like the real Mixed Signals, please follow us wherever you get your podcasts, and please feel free to review us, especially if you like it.
And if you want more, if you've listened this far, presumably you do, you can always sign up for Semaphore's media newsletter, which is out every Sunday night. Thank you so much for listening.